My OCD is a huge reason why I got into a toxic relationship. It led me to giving myself some of the worst advice someone could follow in that type of situation. My OCD prevented me from getting into a relationship for the first 22 years of my life. So when I was 21, I didn't know anything. I had very, very, very minimal experience with relationships. So I absolutely threw myself into learning about relationships, relationship therapy, the male versus female brain. I became obsessed. Like, I found it deeply fascinating. I still do to this day. Around this point, I had been doing ERP therapy for around 2 years, and I was doing it on my own. I was not seeing a therapist. I have a problem with being hyperindependent. I have OCD and I have ADHD. My OCD really caused me to self-isolate for the majority of my adolescence. And then my ADHD made me feel really stupid. I felt like I had to prove to everyone that I could do it by myself. I didn't want the extra time. I didn't want to stay late with the teacher. I didn't want to work in groups. I wanted to show that I could do it by myself. Now, the first bad advice, I'm going to give you two that I gave myself, but the first one, I followed a lot of therapy accounts. I was obsessed with rewiring my brain and how it worked. I was 2 years out of the treatment center for OCD, and I came across a therapist saying, do not bring your relationship problems outside of your relationship. What I think she meant to say, don't bring up every little disagreement that you and your partner have. Don't speak about your partner badly unnecessarily. Focus on the good. Hype your partner up. I didn't take it that way. The advice that I took from that and that I gave to myself was, you will never say a bad word about your partner, because if you do, no one will like him. You are able to figure out every problem in your relationship by yourself. And my hyperindependence was like, yes, you can. Abso-freaking-lutely. It got in my head that you are wrong if you cannot figure it out yourself, or in this case with your partner. And in my head, I was like, I can make this relationship thrive on my own. I have the tools. I've done the research. Look at everything that I've gathered. This is foolproof. And in my head also, I was like, I basically cured myself of OCD. A relationship shouldn't be that hard. If I could fix that, I can fix any problem. Shockingly, to my dismay, a relationship's not black and white. There's also two people in a relationship. Not everybody will react the same way that you do when put in different situations. Talk about a plot twist. Now, the second piece of advice is actually the best advice I've ever come up with in my therapy journey, but it's the worst advice to use when getting into a new relationship. I, to this day, tell every single person I know who has OCD or anxiety to do this trick. This tip got me to the point where my OCD symptoms were very minimal. Slay. Once again, especially with this advice, should have had a therapist guiding me. I did not. I was like, I could do it by myself. So this is the tip. Every single time I feel anxious, I go towards that feeling. I make a point to do the exact opposite of what my anxiety is telling me to do. For example, if I walk over that bridge, something bad's gonna happen. That's obviously my OCD. So I trained my brain that when I got anxious, I would be like, oh my gosh, yay, okay, wait, this is perfect. I'm anxious. What a fantastic opportunity this is to do an exposure. I'm gonna be able to push myself and make my bubble bigger. I'm gonna utilize this situation. I had been doing that for 2 years straight, and I had been thriving. I was better than I had ever been, and then I started dating. Now, it might be very obvious to not use that tidbit of advice when dating, but I disagreed. I always would emotionally contaminate the guys I went on dates with. Even when I was swiping on dating apps, I'd be like, oh, okay, I can't swipe on this guy because I had like emotionally contaminated him. And then I was like, no, you have to swipe on him, you know, like to push myself to go towards that anxiety. Once again, where was a therapist? I should have been like, Susan, but no. Susan was nowhere to be found. I've never had a therapist named Susan. But literally, to this day, I force myself to go on dates with different types of people to see what I like, see what I don't, see what's OCD, see what's not. So then I ended up meeting my ex. I did not emotionally contaminate him. In fact, I was completely infatuated with him. I thought he was this enigma. He was extremely successful. So many people knew who he was. He was 8 or 9 years older than me. I was 22 at the time. Everybody around him talked about how like kind and generous he was. And he was so upbeat and positive and lively. And like people thought I was cool because he was talking to me. I thought he was so charismatic, so charming. I thought he was amazing. If you asked anyone, I just was head over heels. I currently am dissecting the difference between infatuation and like real feelings. We started seeing each other and then COVID hit. My OCD symptoms started to increase. I was very stressed and it led me to do like a bunch of little texting convulsions. I didn't have a lot of experience with guys, so I just was texting what I thought guys wanted to hear and like what I thought that they wanted. Like I didn't know. And when my ex and I like started dating, he actually told me, he goes, I just didn't understand why you were so weird over text and just seemed so normal in person. I was like, yeah, because I told him about my OCD. He's like, that makes so much sense. I was like, yeah, buddy. We had been seeing each other for like a few weeks and then I actually ended it because I saw too many red flags. I felt like he wasn't as into it as I was and I hate that. And I basically gave him this ultimatum like a few weeks in. I was like, if you're gonna see other people, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And he was like, what is this girl at? Firstly, we've been seeing each other for a few weeks. We barely have seen each other. And thirdly, it's COVID. I used to be so paralyzed by uncertainty and indecisiveness. Very extremely long story short, we decided to stay friends. About, I want to say like a year later, I made a gesture and he then decided that like I was it. Like I was the girl for him. I'll never forget, I was in my sister's room for some reason. We were talking on the phone and he says, you know, when you know, you know. And like, I know. And I remember thinking, but I don't know. And I just remember having this sharp pain explode in my stomach. And I felt so anxious. And my brain was like, no, this is your OCD. It's trying to ruin it for you. Go towards that anxiety. I was misinterpreting my gut feeling for my OCD. So I was going towards my gut feeling instead of running away from it. And I didn't have a therapist, so they weren't able to tell me that I shouldn't have been running after that anxiety. So we basically moved in together within a month, I think it was. Don't quote me. It was really, really fast. I remember feeling very anxious before I left. Everyone around me was like, you're gonna regret it if you don't go. I was so stressed that I felt like I was gonna throw up. And I remember people telling me, it's just your OCD. It's trying to ruin this for you. That's what my OCD did. It just would try to ruin everything that was important to me. And I was like, I'm not gonna let it do it with this situation. But I did like him, obviously, but I obviously ended because there was a lot of red flags the first time. That is why it ended. Flash forward, I'm not going to say the really bad things because I do respect his family. I mean, I've moved on. I don't need to trash his reputation. Now I'm going to tell you a personal experience that I had from that relationship, and then I'm going to tell you what following the horrible advice led me to do and think. I heard that he cheated on his ex before me from a very reliable source. Mind you, he had this incredibly tragic cheating story. So I felt awful even bringing it up because in my head, nobody could have experienced seeing that and doing it to somebody else. I was wrong. But I confronted him and he explained, and I remember feeling so anxious still after and uncertain, which made me then feel, oh, this is my OCD. There's no way this man could cheat. So I blamed my anxiety, I blamed my OCD, and I went towards that anxiety. I didn't tell anyone because OCD lies. OCD is a liar, so it probably wasn't true. It's all in my head. That's what he was telling me, so obviously it was. Another one. He would have these really weird outbursts on the road. Really strange road rage where he'd be like beeping and kind of swerving and being dangerous while like hysterically laughing. It was really weird. He was huge on texting and driving no matter how many times I begged him to stop. He once swerved to the side of the road because I was going like this because I had a headache because he was annoying me. He was like, do you need to go to the effing hospital? You're being so dramatic. And in hindsight, I was being dramatic. I remember being like angry, but then I was thinking about it and I was looking inward and I'm like, well, he's probably right. I was like being really dramatic, like rubbing my head. And I got obviously anxiety from it. If I'm anxious, it's my OCD. If it's my OCD and it's no one's fault but my own, there's nothing to worry about. Don't tell anyone. This was personally the worst thing for me. My love language is physical touch. And he obviously knew that, and he wouldn't give it to me as like a source of control is what a therapist told me. I also just truly don't think he liked physical touch, but got to the point where I would be sobbing because I just wanted him to hug me. Like that's all I wanted. He would give me these gifts and I was like, I don't want this. Like I just want a hug. And whenever I made any advances, I almost always was rejected in the most demeaning, slut-shaming way possible. I was debilitatingly anxious by the end because it happened all the time. I was so confused. But once again, because I was anxious and because my OCD always makes me feel like a horrible person, I was like, this must be true. It's once again my fault. Don't tell anyone. Don't bring your relationship problems outside of your relationship. With the physical affection stuff, he started like being really aggressive. He would like shove me into walls or hugging him for too long. He would like twist my arm. He like once jokingly whacked me in my face. We were in Switzerland and then proceeded to scream at me on the street. And he was being like, you're so crazy and dramatic. Like if I'm such an awful person, call the police, you know? And I was like, I'm just telling you not to hit my face. But that was the moment I finally called my mom. For about a year and a half in, I was sobbing on the streets because he left me there. I told her what happened, but I didn't tell her everything because my OCD told me not to. Everything that went wrong in the relationship, I looked inward and I didn't tell a soul because that's what I thought you were supposed to do. My OCD also told me that I wasn't allowed to break up with my ex until I went back to the States and flew back to Ireland again. And once I was back in Ireland, then I was allowed to safely break up with him. But I had the strength to finally do it because I opened up to my mom. I went back to therapy. And I went back to therapy, funny enough, because I asked him to do couples therapy. And he was like, I'm not doing couples therapy with my 24-year-old girlfriend. And I genuinely remember being like, thank God, because I can break up with you. The therapist was very enlightening, I will say. And I remember still being like, no, but you don't get it. And she's like, no, I get it. I was like, no, you don't though. He's like really actually a good guy. She's like, I don't think so. I was like, no, you're not listening. She's like, no, I am. I started opening up to my sister, to my friends, to my dad, who's not very happy about this. You know what I found is that every single person I told, mind you, I told it in a way that made me look like the villain, because as somebody with OCD, you think that you are. And every single person had the same reaction, and it was shock, and it made me feel so validated. My OCD symptoms had skyrocketed. I basically relapsed when I was in that relationship. I would not have stayed for the year and a half that I did if I just let people in, if I just asked for help, if I just asked for advice, if I just stayed in or went back to therapy. Something I learned is there's not just one person in a relationship. It does take two. It takes two to do the work. Now, flash forward, we're about 2.5 years out of that relationship. I love my little single life, but that being said, a relationship is something that I definitely feel like I am now ready for. Whether that happens in a month or like years, there's no rush. After that relationship, I dove back into ERP therapy and going about different situations differently, because shockingly, it's not a one size fits all, even though that's what my OCD would love. One great piece of advice in one circumstance could actually be a really terrible piece of advice in another, as you've just heard me talk about. This was not relationship OCD. It was an emotionally abusive and toxic relationship. I can't express how important it is to have somebody in your corner to help guide you through this journey with your OCD. If you are struggling with OCD, or if you know somebody who's struggling with OCD, go to NOCD.com. All of their therapists are licensed and trained in OCD and exposure and response prevention therapy. People who have any sort of like mental illness and like OCD, we are more prone to getting involved in toxic relationships. Having somebody there to help you and help understand what's your OCD and what's your gut is invaluable. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helped a bit.